Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this AAA webinar, Advancing Beyond AA. That's the support for you for December 2024 exams. My name is Richa and I work as Education Support Manager at ACCA. So as the title of the webinar suggests, Advancing Beyond AA. So our session today is designed to support you with your upcoming exams, helping you to know that how you need to move forward with what you have learned in AA and then coming on to AAA paper. So we have our expert tutor Afaf Noor, and she has joined us to share practical guidance on how to step up from audit and assurance exam. Afaf will provide you insights into the nature of the task, their structure, and correct usage of tools while answering your AAA questions. She will also showcase a few examples to help you write answers that will earn you the marks you really need to pass your exam. So we will also pick the questions live towards the end. So before I hand over to Afaf, just allow me 2 minutes more where I can cover the housekeeping items. So at the bottom of your screen, there are a few buttons which you can use to suit yourself. Like there is a help icon, so that provides resources, information to help you resolve any technical issue you might have during this session. Then there are icons of both slides and media player. So you will need to see both of them during the webinar. So make sure that they are selected. There is an attendee chat function, which is there. You can engage with your fellow webinar attendees. You can also let us know from where you have joined us from. But please be mindful, do not share your too much of personal details in the chat. Then there is resource list that will provide you an access to the resources which are very much relevant to today's session, and those resources include direct links as well. You can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to, and if at any point you cannot hear what we are saying or you cannot see any visuals, please do refresh your browser. Registering for the session means that you will be getting an email tomorrow with details like how you can listen to it again. So don't worry, if you miss something or you have any technical issues, you will be able to access the recording. So I am going to hand over to Afaf in a moment and will be back with you towards the end of the session. If you want to ask ACCA or Afaf a question, then please post them in Q&A box. And please be mindful, the questions posted in Q&A box only will be answered, not the chat ones. So, and we cannot also guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or via web chat, but we hope that the questions we share will be helpful to everyone. So with this, handing over to you, Afaf.
Thanks so much, Richa. Hi, everyone. Like Richa said, I'm going to be taking you through how we can have a very good chance of passing the AAA exam. I've been teaching AA and AAA for almost over 15 years now. So I really do hope that the insights that I have can help you have a higher chance of passing your exam in the upcoming attempt. Now, we're going to be looking at how AAA differs from AA, and therefore how we can direct our efforts towards understanding what the examiner wants. We're not just going to be having a theoretical discussion about this. I'm going to be taking you through examples to show you how the step up can be achieved in topics which are very frequently tested in the AAA exam. So with that in mind, let's just start off with a basic understanding of where the differences are. I'm sure you know this already, but just to quickly recap, we know that AA had a mix of objective test questions and constructed response questions where you had to type up the answer onto a word processing area. The scenarios in section B of AA were shorter, and most points were worth 1 mark, and testing was a mix of knowledge-based and scenario-based testing. So in AA, you could get some easy marks for just stuff that you've learned and is then tested in the exam. In AAA, on the other hand, the question styles are quite different. For example, section A will have a case study with around 3 to 4 exhibits given. You'll need to link information across the exhibits so that you can evaluate and analyze various aspects of the audit engagement. There's very little knowledge-based testing in AAA. It is pretty much restricted to recently introduced standards or current issues. So most of the time in the entire AAA exam, you will be required to apply your knowledge to the scenario given. So this is a very basic understanding of the difference that the step up or this webinar is going to achieve as well. Now, this application requires a lot of exam technique, which is why you'll see that there are plenty of exam technique articles and videos on ACCA's website. So as compared to AA, you'll see a lot more technique content on the website. Another difference is that in AA, your answers were on the word processing area, and you had some pre-formatted templates that you would just fill in for 1 mark for each point. In AAA, you're going to be given spreadsheets as well, particularly in Section A. You can use them for your calculations of materiality or analytical procedures. But a very important point to keep in mind is that whatever calculations you do on those spreadsheets will need to be referred to in the main answer that you're typing up onto the word processing area. So quite a few times you might have done your ratio analysis for your risk question on the spreadsheet, but if you haven't used those calculations in your risk assessment, you're not going to be awarded any marks at all. So even if the spreadsheet has all the correct answers, if they're not used in your answer, you get absolutely no marks for them. And this is the best part, in terms of your time available, you had 3 hours for 100 technical marks in AA. You're going to have 3 hours and 15 minutes in AAA, but, and this is what I was talking about, AAA has 80 technical marks and 20 professional skills marks. You don't need to do anything extra for those 20 marks. So if you have the required knowledge, if you have the required exam technique, which includes time management and answering techniques, then essentially you're going to have 3 hours, 15 minutes for an 80-mark paper. So the split is done in a way that there's nothing extra that you have to write to get the professional skills marks. So hopefully by the end of the session today, and before we get to the Q&A, you would have understood how for the same topics, the application of knowledge and therefore the marks availability differ for both the exams. This is going to be particularly useful if you've just recently taken your AA exam. Now, in terms of a couple of other points that I wanted to reiterate, I'm sure you know this already, particularly if you're taking your exam in the upcoming attempt, but whatever you studied in AA is assumed knowledge for AAA. So the risk assessment process, the entire audit process, to be honest. But on top of that, you need to have SPR level financial accounting knowledge to be able to attempt the questions in Advanced Audit and Assurance. So the idea is your audit techniques that you learned in Audit and Assurance need to be applied to the financial knowledge of SBR to basically create a AAA question. So please make sure that, particularly if you've had a gap since you last sat your AA exam or your SPR exam, please make sure you go onto the study hub, revise the key topics before you start attempting questions for Advanced Audit and Assurance. Another thing, and this is something that I've said earlier as well, I think a lot of students who struggle in passing this exam do so primarily because they're not applying the knowledge in the way the examiner expects. So, and this is what I said earlier as well, I know there's a risk in this area that assets could be overstated, but this particular line is barely just half a mark. You need to have the technique to convert this risk into a 3-mark answer. So application of knowledge to different scenarios, each scenario is going to be different every single time, and then the ability to apply that knowledge in the techniques that the examiner expects. This is where the difference from AA is. There are certain topics which you've never studied in AA. So professional issues like money laundering, then the audit of groups. In audit and assurance, we were only looking at individual companies' financial statements. In the Advanced Audit and Assurance exam, you could be tested on group audit across the entire paper. So it could be at the planning stage for procedures or for reporting. Then there's a concept called business risk, which is completely new to AAA. And then you have these very interesting non-audit engagements like forensic accounting, like prospective financial information. And then you have current issues and developments. Please remember, in the AAA exam, if a current issue is going to be tested, it's going to be tested to the extent that is available in the technical article. So keeping an eye on the website, looking at the technical articles in that particular area of current developments is very important for this exam. Now, with all of this background, I'm now going to take you through a question, and this is where I'm going to slightly slow down a bit as well. I want to spend more time on this. So if I just stop here for a second, we know what audit risk is, be it AA or AAA. In the simplest of terms, audit risk means the auditor has to identify areas of the financial statements which have a higher chance of fraud and error. It's literally as simple as that. So I have a set of financial statements in my hands, which double entries or which disclosures could be misstated. So the concept remains exactly the same. Let's read through a question that could still come up in AAA, but we'll see how the difference is in terms of the application of knowledge. So for this question, it is the 1st of July. You're an audit supervisor at a firm called Teal, and you've recently been appointed as an auditor to Green, and you're planning your first audit for the year ended 31st July. So you'll see that because it's the planning stage, you're starting it before the year end. In November last year, Green spent $400,000 on an advertising campaign, and the cafes were opened in December. The advertising expenditure has been included within the intangible assets, and they've amortized this over 24 months as the directors believe that the advertising is going to generate additional revenue for that period of time. Now, when you were looking at a AA question, the expectation was you would know basic accounting. You should be able to pick up what they've done wrong and then give a risk response from the auditor's perspective. So it was 1 mark for audit risk, 1 mark for response. So we know that advertising expense cannot be capitalized. So the fact that they've capitalized the expense is incorrect. This means their assets are overstated and expenses are understated. So I was writing so much, right? I was saying it's incorrect that they've capitalized this into intangible assets. I've written intangible assets are overstated. I've written expenses are understated, but I'm just getting 1 mark because that's the marking scheme for AAs. In terms of what the auditor plans on doing regarding this risk, the responses could have a number of answers, but like an easy one would be, I'm going to discuss the matter with the management and ask them to correct this because they're not allowed to capitalize this. Now, if you look at this, the scenario was shorter, the answer was more focused, and there were lesser marks available. We're now going to look at how the AAA application and scenario changes. And this is where I'm going to be covering the exam techniques that I spoke about as well. So the answer that I'll now discuss in a little while will cover professional skills marks as well as technical marks. So let's read through this. It is the 1st of July. You're a manager in the audit department of Stanley Associates, responsible for the audit of the group. So we've never seen a group question in AA. The year end is 30th September. So for the 30th September year end, I've obviously started the planning earlier. The group is not a listed company and they operate a number of hardware stores. So that was the background information given. Now this is where the complication is coming in. So Wench is the financial services company of the group, and they operate the Hammer Bank. In the last year, the financial services regulator has been investigating many banks for charging extra fee to customers in relation to loans. This basically means that the customers can claim the money back. Now, Wench has received legal claims for 25,000 customers, and they have recognized a provision of 22 million. So, and this is from one of the recent past exams. So they have already booked a provision that's already there. And in terms of the requirement, you have to evaluate, step number one, prioritize. I can't do this right now, but I'll tell you what the technique is. The risk of material misstatement in planning the audit of the group. Now, there are a number of things you need to keep in mind. Evaluate means you can't just tell me this area is under overstated. You have to sort of build it up to the financial statement impact. So evaluating a ROM has an answering technique. Prioritizing is another additional professional skills mark, and only talk about the ROM. So when they say risk of material misstatement, this means you cannot talk about any detection risk in that particular scenario. Audit risk includes detection risk and ROM, but over here, they've asked for just the risk of material misstatement. So let's look at how we can get the super easy marks as long as you're aware of the technique. At the start of the case study, you would have determined materiality. They are going to, please keep this in mind, they're going to give you the benchmark to use. So they'll say revenue or total assets or profit. Based on that benchmark, you're going to do the upper and lower limit. You're going to decide on the materiality amount. So while I evaluate the risk, I'm not going to do a percentage calculation again. I'm going to get one super easy professional skill mark for simply saying, based on the materiality, this provision is material. So I compared my 22 million, was it, to the materiality I had said it was material. I write this one line down. So I get my super easy first mark. Then the build-up that I was talking about. My concern as the auditor is, yes, so you can't say they haven't booked a provision. If you write the risk is a provision has not been recognized, that's a zero, because that's incorrect. They've already booked a provision. The risk is that maybe this provision expense is incomplete, or maybe the amount is not correct. So maybe there are more claims that they've not booked. So the risk relates to the provision not being completely recognized or correctly recognized. So that's half a mark. And because of that, my concern is liabilities are understated and profit is overstated. You could also write expenses understated. So I've literally just written exactly the same format as AA. I haven't added anything at all, but I've gotten actually 2.5 marks, one professional skill mark, and then 1.5 mark for the explanation. I'm not done yet. Remember, you're evaluating the risk. I'm also concerned that there could be more claims. Because the investigation is ongoing, currently 22 million is for 25,000 customers. I'm concerned that there could be more claims, and that's your second professional skill mark. You're basically evaluating to say that maybe this amount is going to be bigger because there could be more claims that are coming through. And then I'm building it up even further. Because, so the refunds that I have to do, the claims I have to do is one aspect. I'm now going to be talking about the compliance aspect. Because, of course, the financial services sector is regulated. Another concern is that there's going to be a penalty which might be imposed by the regulator. And again, because I know my SBR, where there's a huge focus on disclosures, I'm also concerned about the disclosure regarding this provision being inadequate or complete. So remember, when we talk about IS 37, there's a double entry, and then there's a disclosure for that double entry. So I'm evaluating the risk even further. I'm not just concerned about the 22 million, the number, I'm also concerned about the disclosure, and I'm going on to explain what the disclosure requirements are. So I've given like a few examples to say this is what needed to be disclosed. And finally, just to wrap it all up, we're also talking about the legal costs that the client will have to incur in dealing with those claims. So we're talking about 3 types of probable outflows that need to be accounted for. The claims themselves, the fines or the fines from the regulator, and then because I'm going to have a lawyer for this, then their legal fee as well. So The same concept, which was literally provision, was tested in AA in a number of course, questions, but it was 1 mark. Over here, the exam technique includes understanding that at this level, I can't just focus on that one line that is given. I have to think about the implication for this risk on other areas as well. So the build up or the exam technique differs for advanced audit and assurance. Similarly, I'm going to be doing this for a number of topics. And remember, risk, procedures, reporting, and ethics. These are the 4 topics I'm covering today. And all 4 of these topics are there in every single AAA exam. So you can't really run away from any of these topics. So let's look at a question from AA. Again, the knowledge remains the same. Potentially, the same example could be tested in AAA as well, but the expectation would be slightly different. So in May, the management of the client decided to close down one of their shops. An announcement was made on the website on 28th of May, and the staff was told of the timetable for closure. All 32 staff employed have been made redundant, and a provision of 1.8 million has been included in the financial statements for the year ended 31st May. The closure is expected to take place in September. So we're looking at now IS 37, and we're looking at whether there was an obligation at the year end, keeping in mind that the announcement was made. And with this background, for 1 mark each procedure, the requirement in AA would typically look like describing the substantive procedures on the redundancy provision. The answers that you see right now on the screen can be copy-pasted into a AAA question as well, by the way. So regarding this provision in particular, you're going to review the website to make sure the announcement was made before the year end, because I need to see if there was an obligation at the year end. I'm going to discuss with the management how the staff were informed. I'm going to inspect any correspondence in writing that was sent to them. I'm going to get the redundancy provision. I can recalculate it. I can compare the information in that breakdown to payroll records, etc. So you could have the exact same question in AAA with the exact same answer. If the examining team is in a good mood, and they quite often are, they could give you exactly this, which is really a AA question. But of course, keeping in mind, this is advanced audit and assurance, let's see what a procedures question would typically look like. Now, I'm going to be giving you hints about the answer while I read the question. Just keep in mind, in AAA, you don't have to learn assertions or procedures like you might have done in AA. In AAA, and I love teaching this topic, it's just information that is given in this scenario. You need to think about how to confirm that. So let's start. Again, it's a group. They operate 38 offshore oil and gas platforms of different sizes. Now, the group treats each platform as a separate cash generating unit, and they do perform an annual review for each of these for impairment indicators. So stop here for a second. IS 36. There's the carrying value, which I need to compare to the recoverable amount. I need to have my accounting knowledge correct. The recoverable amount is the higher of value in use and fair value. So before I even proceed with this information, my audit is going to involve confirming the carrying value, confirming the fair value, confirming the value in use. I haven't read the question right now. So now this is where the scenario linkage starts. Due to the nature of the platforms and difficulty obtaining a market value for the sales value of each site, the impairment test compares the carrying value with the value in use. So what has the management done? They've said in recoverable amount, unfortunately, we cannot determine fair value. So we've just used value in use, and that's it. And this is where my first procedure should be. I need to confirm that it really is difficult to determine the fair value of each of the sites, because of which they've just used value in use. So my accounting knowledge has to be very clear. Fair value is something that needs to be audited. Value in use is my forecasted income and expenses. So my forecast from these particular platforms. So they're basically filtering out answers that you can't write in your answer, really. Now let's move on. Future revenues. Now they're talking about value in use. Future revenues are estimated based on long-term oil and gas price predictions, and costs are based on average operating and capital costs associated with the specific platform after adjusting for predicted inflation rates. Value in use is already a problematic area because it's estimates. So now my procedures need to focus on how the future revenues were estimated and how the future costs were estimated and how did they look at the predicted inflation rates. Are they just making up the inflation rates, or are they getting information from credible external sources? These are then discounted at the group's standard discount rate for platforms of 1.5%. So now I can also have procedures regarding the appropriateness of this discount rate. I could get simple half a mark, it's not much, but simple half a mark for recalculating the value in use as well. Estimates are reviewed on a 6-monthly basis, enabling management to have up-to-date figures for the interim financial statements. And the requirement is design the principal audit procedures to be performed on impairment. Now over here, impairment is a standard which was not tested in AA. Groups is a topic which was not tested in AA. A AA question would never have this much information available. And this is what I meant by application. You could have learned your procedures for impairment by heart, and you could still end up getting a 0 in this question if you don't apply your answer to the scenario. Procedures are still 1 mark per procedure as long as you cover the what and the why. So let's have a look at this then. In terms of the answer, again, just have a discussion with the management and confirm the fair value can't be used, and then focus your procedures on value in use. So starting off with the first one, what am I doing? I'm discussing with the management the difficulties that they faced in measuring the fair values. Why am I doing it? To confirm it is okay to use value in use. Remember, recoverable amount is the higher of the two. They're not doing higher of the two because they can't figure out the fair value. So my first question should be, let's just get that out of the way and move on to value in use. For the second one, I want the actual schedule of value in use. Why? Because I want to confirm the assumptions. I want to make sure they're reasonable. So the what is the first line, the why is the second point that I've underlined. In terms of the long-term gas and oil prices, I can't just rely on management assumptions. This is very important for your professional skills mark. If your entire answer to procedures is based on management inquiry and written representations, you're not going to get the professional skills mark. As auditor, we need to look for better quality evidence. So for the long-term gas and oil prices, I need to compare the assumptions to market data and other industry forecasts that are available. In terms of the discount factors, I need to make sure the appropriate discount factor has been used in terms of the risk being factored in. So I'm just going to go back. Sorry, I just pressed that too quickly. Hang on, let me just put that in front of you. Okay, so when I look at these 4 answers, if there's any student who's just written the first answer or just gone on to say get the written representation, you'd get the technical marks, but you won't get any professional skills marks at all because you haven't gathered sufficient appropriate evidence, which includes more reliable evidence from third parties. Any student who's written all of these will get 4 technical marks along with an automatic professional skill mark for using the right procedures to cover the risk. So at the start, when I said there's nothing extra that you need to do for your professional skills marks, this is what I meant. So this is straight away 5 marks that you're getting. Just to quickly say this, I know I always end up sounding like a broken record, but please remember the what and the why. If you simply write, discuss with the management the difficulties in measuring the fair value, full stop, That's only half a mark. You have to tell me why you're having that discussion. Moving on to the third topic, which is again always there in section D of your exams, is completion and reporting. So you know that your syllabus outline specifies that one question in section B will always be from completion and reporting. In AA, the question was shorter. You can instantly tell this is a AA question. They'd given the PBT and the net assets. They'd said the final audit is now nearing completion. The directors have decided against including the redundancy provision because they're saying that because the shops are closing after the year end, we're not booking a liability. So obviously, these directors do not know their IAS 37. You were asked to discuss the issue and describe the impact on the auditor's report. This is a format that we are going to copy in AAA, but expand on this a bit more. In terms of discussing the issue, we're going to talk about the accounting treatment first. So we're going to go on to explain that they did have an obligation at the year end, so a provision does need to be created. If they do not create the provision, then liabilities are understated and profit is overstated. We're going to do a materiality calculation, and we'll say this lack of provision or this misstatement is material. We're doing our calculations, and because it is material, not pervasive, a qualified opinion will be given. Now, you still write this in AAA. I'm going to show you in a minute, but you have to explain why. But at the moment, it's not changing the face of the financial statements. So it's material, definitely, but it's not pervasive. And therefore, you're going to give a qualified opinion, and then you go on to explain the impact on the audit report. So there'll be a basis for qualified opinion paragraph and how the content changes. So exactly the same thing could still come up in AAA, but in a slightly different manner. Now, obviously, I would not pick up an easy question over here. So we have a scenario where the client has a standard warranty scheme in place for its retail customers, and they can get a refund. In previous years, the directors have estimated the provision based on a percentage of total sales, and the audit team had concluded this was okay. So the examiner is telling you that this basis of determining the warranty provision has been agreed to be okay in the past. So you can rely on this. Now, this time around, the CEO is being cheeky. They've jumped in. They have been involved in estimating the warranty provision. They have included this at 2.1 based on the CEO's estimate, whereas last year it was 4.3. Now, there's been a downward trend in the provision. Now, this is now, of course, a trigger for risk. Now, during discussions with the director, the audit team have noted that nothing has changed. So, of course, there can be a decrease in provision if there's a logical reason for this, but they're saying the nature of the warranties have not changed, neither have the level of complaints. And the audit report is about to be issued. Management has decided they're not changing the provision at all, and the audit team has concluded that this is the wrong basis of calculating the provision. So they had, of course, a bit more background information given, but based on all of that, you can conclude that this was the wrong basis. The requirement was discuss the implications of this entire fiasco or scenario on the auditor's report. So we start off by, again, saying the same thing. We're going to start off by doing a calculation. There was enough information given that based on the previous trend, if we take the percentage of sales, the provision should have been this much. And because they have not recorded the provision, it is understated by this much. The misstatement is material because it is 8.5% of total assets. By the way, you're getting extra marks for all these calculations. But this is where the change comes in. I have to explain why it is not pervasive in the AAA exam. So in AA, I simply wrote it's material, not pervasive, and I got my mark. Over here, I have to explain why. So it's material, but not pervasive because it's restricted or limited to a specific account. It's the liability and expense that is basically understated. So it's not a substantial portion of the financial statements, and therefore it is not pervasive. I'm going to give a qualified opinion, and because of the qualified opinion, there are going to be changes in my audit report. The headings will change for the opinion and basis for opinion paragraph, and the basis for opinion paragraph will explain these contents. So the answering technique for your opinion questions, I keep doing this, I just moved too quickly. Apologies, guys. I'm just going to put this back in over here. So the answering technique for my reporting questions is exactly the same. We did a discussion on accounting issue. We spoke about materiality. We spoke about the under overstatement, and then we explained the impact on the audit report. The only difference is my scenario was a bit more complicated. There were more calculations that were there, but because I've followed the format, I've done my calculations, I've justified my opinion, I'm getting about 5 technical marks, and I'm getting a professional skill mark as well. My opinion is appropriate, it is justified, so without any extra effort, I'm automatically getting my professional skills marks as well. So again, the step up wasn't too massive in this particular topic. The only difference was the background information required a bit more analysis. So you were expected to do more calculations here. The last topic then that I'm discussing for today is the ethical part. Now in AA, most of the time ethics was tested in OD questions, so section A, but there were occasional easy questions in section B as well. So over here, this was a very short scenario given. At the end of the planning meeting, the director has mentioned that one of the key reasons the firm was appointed was because of the knowledge of the industry. There were concerns that whether they would keep the information that they have confidential. And the requirement was very straightforward. It was very knowledge-based. There was no need to use the scenario. You had to explain the safeguards for managing the conflict of interest. So they called it conflict of interest. They asked for knowledge-based safeguards. You do not have to use the scenario, and you give all the relevant safeguards. You need to make sure both the companies know. You need to have written consent. You need to make sure the teams are segregated. You need to make sure they do not have access to information of the other client. So super easy, 4 marks, and you were done. In AAA, the questions are going to be combined with other topics. I knew I would be running short of time, so I only picked up a small portion of this question, but just to give you an idea of how the answer is going to flow. It is the 1st of July, you're an audit manager in a firm, and you're assigned to the audit of PALE, which has a financial year end of 30th September. There was an exhibit, and you had notes from a phone call. Now, PALE publishes a wide range of sustainability indicators as a part of their annual report, and they were shown in Exhibit 4 as well. I think Mark was the CFO. So the CFO has asked our firm if we can provide assurance on these KPIs as a part of the performing the annual audit. So they want assurance on these sustainability key performance indicators as a part of audit. So I can have a good discussion on the professional issues as well. Additionally, Mark wants to pay for this extra work, of course, but they want the audit fee to be increased by 20%, assuming that the assurance is going to be favorable. So they're not treating this as a separate engagement. They are linking the fee to a favorable outcome. You know, this is contingent fee, and there's some professional issues there as well. With regards to the requirement, using Exhibit 5, you have to explain the ethical issues and other planning implications. So this question had a bit of, I think, was it money laundering as well? So it was a very nice long question. I'm just going to pick up the first half. Now, in AAA, I can't, number 1, by the way, assurance on sustainability KPIs is not an explicit example covered by the code. So that's the difference. This is not exactly quoted by the code. So I have to interpret the code and apply my knowledge to the scenario. Just look at the first half of this question, because of course I couldn't type up all of it, just the first half. the technique has to flow in a certain manner. We start off by explaining that these KPIs are also a part of other information that as auditors, we are going to review for material inconsistencies. There will be a self-review threat. When I do this review, explain how there's a self-review. There would also be an advocacy threat. There would also be a self-interest threat related to fee. Right now, I'm just naming them, but you have to explain each of these. So from one particular engagement, you're picking up these threats and explaining them. You're going to write that assurance on these KPIs is allowed, provided there's a separate team. Plus, in terms of professional issues, this has to be treated as a separate engagement with separate engagement letters. So up till here, where it says separate engagement letter, up till here, this is my first step of evaluation, which was giving assurance on KPIs. I'm now going to discuss the contingent fee element. So again, fee for audit cannot be on a contingent basis. For any assurance service, it is discouraged, even other than audit. And therefore, we should not be accepting this engagement at all, this arrangement of contingent fee at all. I'm not done yet. Let's talk about our competence and resource. It's not just the ethical considerations, it's the other implication as well. So because it's sustainability, it's a relatively newer evolving area. We need to make sure beyond the teams being segregated, beyond the separate engagement letters, do we have the competence and the resource to accept the engagement? So if you stop over here, the resource part, this is where my answer ends. So you could get about 7 to 8 marks depending on how well you evaluate all of that information. So if I go back for a second, you had this information, which is very little, just an engagement that they want, and then a fee basis that they're offering. And I had to pick up all those points because when they say ethical issues, it's not just self-interest, self-review. I have to go on to explain any other implications on the audit firm as well. So like I said at the start, the knowledge for all these topics that we did remain the same. The knowledge hasn't changed. It's the way the scenario is given. It's the depth of the information that is given, and then the depth of the analysis that is required, which is where the difference is. And this is really the difference between a 49 and 50 as well. If you're aware of the techniques, you can easily cross that 50. That'll be a piece of cake. Now, having told you what all of these step-ups are for topics that were already there in AA, how do we go about approaching this change? Now, I'm sure none of this information is something that you haven't heard before, but trust me when I say that practice is the only way you can pass this exam. When we talk about advanced audit and assurance, I can't just read a question and say, oh, I know what they're talking about. I know the accounting treatment. I know the risk. You can't say that. You have to type up the answer or write it by hand to make sure that you know exactly what the technique is. So please make sure you have, if you're taking your exam in the upcoming attempt, I'm sure you have your plan in place, but even if your practice hasn't been completed yet, you have to do it now. So past exams, which are available on ACC's platform, and then the mock exam that ACC provides in every session. These are a very good evaluation of whether you can complete the exam in the allocated time using the exam techniques that we discussed. Combined with that, you have your technical articles, your topic explainer videos, and your examiner reports. Please do make sure you read the latest examiner report, because for AAA in particular, it's very, very organized and you learn from that. Whatever you've read in your technical articles, whatever you've read in the standard answers of your past exams, they sort of reiterate all of those concepts. So that make it very easy for you to understand where you might be going wrong. So as a part of your preparation or as a part of understanding what the examiner wants in advanced audit and assurance, please make sure that the steps that you see on this screen right now are followed every single time. And with this, For a change, spot on. I normally run over the Q&A part, but this time around, I do have a good 15 minutes to answer your questions. I'm just going to now have a look at my chat box. So you could ask questions regarding this or any other area. It doesn't have to be limited to what we discussed in the session today. If you have any concerns or questions about AAA, please feel free to ask them. Do I need to describe the case in my answer? That's a very good question. So yes, for each topic, your starting point has to be words from the scenario. So if you start off by saying in ethics, this leads to self-review threat, the marker would immediately say what, where, what? What leads to self-review threat? So yes, don't copy paste the entire sentence. You could do it as a heading, but this is what we call identification. Be it risk, be it quality management, be it your ethics questions, the first step has to be identify what you're discussing in the scenario. Okay, so my next question is, do the answers need to be written in points or in paragraphs? And what should be the study plan for 3 weeks? Okay, your answers should be in short paragraphs. So do not use texting or SMS language. Write in full English sentences. Even if your paragraph is one sentence long, that's absolutely fine. So for each procedure, you write the procedure, press enter, write the next one. Even when you're evaluating risk, give it a heading. So talk about impairment. For each sentence that you type up, just press space before you move on to the next point. So in short paragraphs, even if they're one line, should be fine. For the next 3 weeks, if that's where you're at, make sure you have the knowledge first. If you have covered your knowledge aspect through, for example, the Study Hub or any other approved content providers content, then the next 3 weeks is practice only. So identify which exams or which questions you haven't done and start just practicing. Start practicing topic-wise. So do your case studies. After the third or the fourth one, you'll pick up where you're going wrong. So if your knowledge is covered, it's only practice. If it's not, then I would want that you first cover the knowledge area, revise any accounting standards that you have to revise, and then move on to your practice in the remaining time. Okay, another one. How would you approach the question, any particular order, question number 1, 2, 3? I do not have a recommendation, and normally it differs from tutor to tutor. Personally, I would say do question number 1 first, but only if you can be very disciplined about your time management. So 1 hour, 45 minutes on the case study. This includes reading, writing, everything. And then the remaining 1 hour split between question 2 and 3. If you can be very disciplined about sticking to your time management, then I would recommend that you start off with question number 1. I have often been told by my students that sometimes when you're doing question number 2, you'd come back and say, oh my God, I forgot that in question 1 because I picked up a new risk. You can go back and amend that. So again, no preference, but whatever sequence you choose, please make sure you stick to your time management. 1 hour, 15 minutes for the case study, and then half an hour each for section B questions. Okay, so a technical question has come through. Can you explain what is pervasive or not, and how do we determine that? I'll give you a technical answer, and then I'll give you a AAA answer. So when we talk about the auditing standards, pervasive means anything that changes the face of the financial statements. So pervade is an English word, which means takes over, or this pervades the financial statements. So there could be 3 elements technically. There are problems in many double entries. So of course it's just pervasive, everything is wrong. There is only one double entry which is wrong, but it's almost the same amount as the profit figure. So there is a provision that they're not booking for 10 million and the profit is 10.5 million. So if they book that one double entry, debit, expense, credit, liability, the profit would reduce to 500,000. So you see how the face changes. Shareholders saying, oh my God, my company has a profit of 10.5 to, oh my God, just 500,000. So although it's just one double entry, it changes the It's fundamental to the entire financial statements. It's that big. The biggest part is the third one, which is disclosure. Sometimes it's a disclosure which is missing or inadequate, which could be pervasive, which means the statement of profit or loss, statement of financial position, all numbers are accurate. But there's a disclosure, for example, related to going concern that the client has refused to give. That could still be considered pervasive. So in AAA, it's things like these. Like when we aggregated the misstatements, they came up to almost the same amount as the profit figure. Or there are problems in many areas. Or there's a disclosure which is very important for the user's understanding, and the client is not giving that disclosure correctly. So to be honest, it'll be very easy for you to pick up pervasiveness because the examiner does give quite a few hints as they give the question as well. Okay, how often should I try to apply professional skepticism? Is it only in section A? No, it is in section A and B, and it should be applied throughout the exam paper. See, professional skepticism is an underlying concept for audit. You can't really be an auditor or a good auditor without skepticism, which is why it's there throughout the audit and even in other assurance engagements. So if you're doing a question on prospective financial information, which is about forecasts, if you're writing good procedures focused on evaluating the estimates, you still are applying professional skepticism. So you do it throughout the paper. It's only the communication mark which is there in section A and not section B. The rest of the marks are spread across the paper. Okay, so I have another one for matters to be considered question. Planning stage and completion stage matters, drafting are different formats, right? Can I honestly say it's not? Matters to consider, so wrong, and matters to consider has exactly the same format. Comment on materiality, explain the accounting treatment, explain the problems, explain the financial statement impact. The only difference is in completion questions, the risks would be given in a bit more depth. So if you're talking about the answering techniques, they're exactly the same, the one that I just said. Do I refer to the auditor or use I when answering the questions? Jennifer, it's absolutely fine. You could do either. You could do either. It doesn't matter at all. Will a spreadsheet be provided in the actual CBE exam? Yes. So it will always be there in your section A question, which is the case study. So you'll have the word processing area, you'll have the spreadsheet. You don't have to use it, by the way. So if you're just doing your calculations on the calculator and writing the answer in your spreadsheet, it's absolutely fine. At the moment, there's no requirement for you to, it's not mandatory to use the spreadsheet. This is a very good question. Can I ask what will be the best time allocation for AAA? Is it 1.8 or 1.9? Is it just the typing time? Any guidance on reading the scenario? This is what I would want. So let's do the case study. The case study, we're giving 1 hour, 45 minutes. 15 minutes, spend that time just in reading the case study and highlighting the key information. And then when you start typing up the answer, use 1.5 minutes per mark. So 1.5 for the writing time available. And you will be able to manage your time beautifully. Because, so for example, for a 10-mark answer, I'm going to give myself 15 minutes. I've already read the case study. I have margin available to go read it again because I'm only giving myself 1.5 minutes. So within the 15 minutes, I'm going to write the answers to the best of my potential. I'm going to make sure I have the format there, going to fill up the format and spend 15 minutes. After the 15 minutes are done, I'm going to move on to question number B, which might be another 10 marks. And if you use the 1.5 minute for the writing time available rule, you will have time to come back to each question at a later point in time as well. But the 15 minutes reading time, I would highly recommend that you spend just on the case study. Okay, so commercial acumen, how to get that professional skill mark in AAA easily. So commercial acumen is primarily there in your, I'll tell you frequent examples, in business risk number one. So whenever there's a business risk question, if you're evaluating the business risk properly, explaining how serious the impact can be, you're automatically getting a commercial acumen mark. So commercial acumen means if you demonstrate knowledge of how things work in that particular industry. Then in your ethics questions or in acceptance questions, when you have discussions like if you accept a client and you later give an incorrect opinion and then a lawsuit is filed against you, against the firm, that gets you the commercial acumen mark. So commercial acumen, you don't need to have any industry specific knowledge. From the given scenario, if your evaluation includes some element of how the business will be affected, you automatically get your commercial acumen marks. So business risks always have this. And normally, whenever you discuss the impact on the firm, lawsuits that might be filed against the firm's reputation if they associate themselves with the client who's involved in money laundering. So things like the firm's point of view in terms of commercially what happens to them, that gets you the commercial acumen mark. Any new article or areas to focus on? I'm not sure about the article. You can have a look. I'm not sure what's your definition of new, but please remember sustainability is a major area of testing for the upcoming sessions. Like not just in the next 3 months or 6 months, we're talking about the near future. So please make sure in the other assignment section, you have 2 articles on sustainability and sustainability assurance, 3 articles in total, sorry. Make sure you've prepared all 3 of them. Please have a look at your syllabus guide. It does require you to have application knowledge of sustainability assurance as well. So maybe procedures regarding sustainability. Okay. Which specific areas differ in the UK paper? So in the UK paper, your answers will differ for some areas in ethics because we use the FRC's ethical standard and in audit report. So these 2 areas in particular, but there's one topic which is in the UK syllabus, which is insolvency, which is not there in the international syllabus. So for UK, it's insolvency. For international, it's performance information of public sector organizations. But most of the paper is the same, but ethics and reporting answers might differ. Okay, Shazia has a very good question. How do I self-mark my answers by comparing them to the standard answer? The first thing I would want you to do is go have a look at the marking scheme. The marking scheme will tell you the key answer points that should be there. So first, identify which risks, which answers you've missed. Then go on to read the detailed area and fill in the format. So in the risk question, they have a comment on materiality. I missed it. They've explained the impact on profit as well. I only spoke about liabilities. So first the marking scheme and then the details and making sure you match the answer formats. For procedures, I only said get a written representation. I didn't explain the purpose. So I missed that. So when you mark yourself, match it in that manner. Step number 1, which points did I miss? Step number 2, did I follow the answer format to make sure everything was covered? I have another question. Okay, I thought I'd answered all. Are we also supposed to know the ISAs? Oh, no. So are we also supposed to know all the auditing standards or understanding the accounting standards is enough? You need to know both. Your entire AAA syllabus for external audit is based on auditing standards. You don't need to learn the names. You don't need to learn the numbers. But whatever I spoke about today was all from the auditing standards. So you do need to know it, but not the names. Similarly, in AAA, you don't get marks for writing the accounting standard number. So you get no marks for saying IS 37 says this. The mark is for explaining what a provision is. Present obligation, past event, probable outflow and expense can be measured. Even if you've not written IS 37, you still get that mark. Richa, is there anything? Oh yeah, so I've answered Nicola's question as well. I'm just thinking if there's anything I've missed. Yeah.
Hi, Afaf.
Hi. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. So I think you have covered quite all of them, all of the questions, in fact, I should say. And
Yes.
that's really great. And I hope students have are taking so much back with them and utilize all this information when they are preparing for their AAA exams. And so with this, I'm just afraid we will now have to close this session. And before closing this, I would like to mention that if you want to refer the session again, please use the same registration link to watch it on demand. You will also receive an email tomorrow to let you know, I mean, that this link will be shared again with you so that you can watch it on demand. Do share it with your friends and your classmates who have not been able to attend this session today so that they are able to get more information like you from this one. And I would also like to remind that all the important resources are there in the resource section. So please do take a copy of them as well with you and do use them for your exam preparations. I should tell you that mock exams are also going live from 11th November. So for all the papers, including AAA as well, do make use of that as also. And and these mocks will be followed by debriefs later in the same week. So finally, thank you so much everyone for joining this session today, and many thanks to Afaf for making this session so lively, so informative for each one of you. And thank you very much to the team who is there at the back end with me to help deliver this session successfully. Wish you all the very, very best for your exam preparations and also for your final exams. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.